Good evening, students. I am very pleased to address you this evening on a very wonderful and very useful subject which is relevant for anyone who wants to know about the fundamentals of financial management. Financial management is a subject which is covering the application of the financial resources a company is mobilizing. Every company, when they mobilize the financial resources, they incur a cost to mobilize the same. This cost, we call it as cost of capital. The source of funding is one aspect, and how effectively you are going to make use of these funds which you have earned or which you have mobilized using the various means of funding. Now, this cost which you are incurring to mobilize the funds which are the vital blood or the most important the energy behind the functioning of a company, which we call as financial funds. The cost incurred to mobilize the funds is known as cost of capital. Now, every money you spend to mobilize these funds, which are the sources of carrying out the activities of an organization, is known as the cost of capital. This cost of capital has two parts. One is the cost, another is the capital. The capital is the resources used, and the cost is the borrowing expenditure. Thus, a company incurs various types of borrowing expenditures. For example, if it is borrowing a capital which is not owned by the company, that is known as an interest. That capital is known as debt capital, and the borrowing cost related to a borrowed capital or the debt capital is known as interest. So, interest is one type of borrowing expenditure. The second type of capital, so interest is related to what we call it as debt capital. Now, if you are borrowing funds which are not going to be your own but are going to be lent by somebody else, that is known as a debt capital. The another type of capital which is very relevant in this context is a capital which is your owned capital. This capital is having two parts. One is an equity capital, another is a preferred stock. The difference between an equity capital and a preferred stock is that an equity capital, the ownership is absolutely bestowed on those people who are giving the money for the company. They are known as the shareholders. On the other hand, there are some shareholders who are not very sure about the functioning of the company, but neither they want to be the debtors nor they have made up their mind to be the absolute owners of the company. They are known as preferred shareholders because they prefer to have the return back on preference to other claimers, as well as any return they are getting, they must give in preference and as compared to the absolute owners. So the owned capital is two parties. One is equity capital, the another is preferred capital. These two capital, when they are getting a return, that return is known as dividend. In other words, the borrowing cost for a owned capital is known as dividend. Now I ask a fundamental question from you is that, suppose a company earns a profit, but the profit is not distributed as dividend, but is retained in the company. Maybe the company wanted to make use of that profit again for future expansion, for future operations. Is also a return for the equity shareholders? The money is genuinely due to them, but the company is right now not paying them, or it is retaining that money in the company so as to facilitate more activities, so as to facilitate future profits, a large scale profit which is again due to these owners of the company. That is known as retained earnings. So retained earnings is the second part of this borrowing cost related to the owned capital, retained earnings.
Hmm?